The crack of a gunshot shattered the morning calm of Redemption Creek, but it wasn't the sound that made Mercy Ravenwood drop to the dusty boardwalk. It was the whistling lead that splintered the wood inches from her skirts. The year was 1879, and dying for a newspaper article seemed a foolish way to meet her maker, especially when she'd only just arrived in this untamed corner of Wyoming Territory. "Get down, you fool." A large hand pressed firmly against her back, keeping her flattened against the rough planks as two more shots rang out from the saloon across the street. The voice belonged to a man who now positioned himself between her and the danger, his Colt peacemaker drawn and ready. Mercy glanced up at her protector, tall, broad-shouldered, with dust-stained clothes and a weather-beaten face partially obscured by a well-worn Stetson. His eyes, sharp and blue as summer lightning, scanned the saloon's facade with practiced precision. "Whoever's shooting must have recognized you," the stranger muttered, his voice a low rumble. "Recognized me?" Mercy shook her head, wisps of auburn hair falling loose from her practical bun. "I only stepped off the stagecoach yesterday. Then you've made enemies mighty fast." The shooting stopped, and the man cautiously rose to his feet, still keeping himself between Mercy and potential danger. He holstered his weapon but didn't relax his vigilance. "Name's Matthew Quinn. Most folks call me Matt." "Mercy Ravenwood," she replied, accepting his outstretched hand and rising to her feet with what dignity she could muster. "I'm here representing the Denver Chronicle." Matthew's expression darkened immediately. "A newspaper woman in Redemption Creek." He ran a hand over his stubbled jaw. "You'll get yourself talked about, Miss Ravenwood." Mercy straightened her spine, patting dust from her practical traveling dress. "Then let them talk about Mercy," she replied, her green eyes flashing with defiance. "I didn't travel 500 miles to be scared off by a few bullets or small town gossip." Matthew studied her with a mixture of exasperation and reluctant admiration. "Whatever story you're chasing, it's already trying to put you in the ground. That ain't gossip, that's a coffin nail." "The truth often provokes strong reactions, Mr. Quinn." She retrieved her fallen notebook, checking to ensure her pencil hadn't broken. "That's precisely why it needs telling." "Truth," he snorted. "Lady, there's a dozen different truths in a town like this, and most of 'em will get you killed." A crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the gunshots. Matthew noticed a man at the edge of the onlooker's dark suit, clean-shaven, watching them with cold calculation before slipping away. "You have somewhere safe to stay?" Matthew asked, suddenly aware they were becoming the center of attention. "The Willowbrook boarding house," Matthew grimaced. "Old Widow Simmons' place, directly across from the sheriff's office. Is that a problem? Only if you're planning to stir up trouble that the sheriff himself might be mixed up in." Matthew took her elbow, guiding her away from prying eyes. "Look, I don't know what you're investigating, but someone's already marked you. Until you figure out who's gunning for you, you'd best keep your head down." "Mr. Quinn, Matt," he corrected, "and I don't much care what you're about to say." "If you're dead set on staying in Redemption Creek, at least let me help you stay alive while you're here." Mercy hesitated, studying the cowboy's face. There was something trustworthy in those weather-lined features, despite his obvious disapproval of her profession and presence. "I'm investigating the land disputes between the Blackwater Mining Company and local ranchers," she finally said. 3 homesteaders have been found dead in the last month. The territorial papers barely mentioned it, but my editor believes there's more to the story." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Those weren't just deaths, Miss Ravenwood, they were executions." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "And you just announced your interest in them by stepping off that stage. How would anyone know my purpose here? Telegraph office, mail coach, spies on the Denver end, take your pick." Matthew sighed. "Blackwater has eyes everywhere, and they don't take kindly to nosy reporters." "Do you work for them?" Mercy asked bluntly. "No, madam, I run what's left of my family's ranch." His eyes hardened. "The Quinn spread is one of the few Blackwater hasn't managed to seize. Yet." A slow smile spread across Mercy's face. "Then perhaps, Mr. Quinn, we might help each other." "How's that? You need someone to tell your side of this land war. I need someone who knows who's who and what's what in Redemption Creek." She extended her hand. "A partnership of convenience." Matthew stared at her offered hand for a long moment. You realize you're making yourself a target. I was already shot at this morning. Seems I'm a target regardless. With a resigned shake of his head, Matthew took her hand. His calloused palm dwarfed her smaller one, but her grip was surprisingly firm. First rule of our partnership, he said. You don't go anywhere alone, not in this town. I'm hardly helpless, Mr. Quinn. I've been taking care of myself for quite some time. Call me Matt, he repeated, releasing her hand. And it ain't about being helpless, it's about knowing when you're outnumbered. Even the best gunslinger in the West can be taken down by enough men with enough money behind them. Mercy considered this. Very well, Matt. But I won't be deterred from my investigation. Wouldn't expect you to be. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. Stubborn as you seem, I reckon trying to stop you would be like trying to redirect the Colorado River with a dinner fork. I'll take that as a compliment, Mercy said with a slight smile. Take it however you please, Matt replied, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. Now come on, let's get you somewhere less exposed while I explain just how deep this particular snake pit goes. As they walked down the dusty main street, Mercy couldn't help but notice how the townspeople watched them, some with curiosity, others with suspicion, and a few with undisguised hostility. Whatever she had stumbled into in Redemption Creek, it was clear that Matthew Quinn was right about one thing. Her presence was already causing talk. But Mercy had never shied away from being the subject of conversation, especially when that conversation might lead to the truth. What she couldn't have known was how this partnership with the taciturn rancher would change not just her story, but the course of her life. The Willowbrook boarding house sat on a corner of Main Street, a 2-story clapboard building with a wrap-around porch and lace curtains in every window. Widow Simmons, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, greeted them at the door with raised eyebrows. Already consorting with Cowboy's Miss Ravenwood. You've been in town less than a day, she remarked, her tone making it clear what she thought of such associations. Mr. Quinn saved me from taking a bullet this morning, Mrs. Simmons, Mercy replied evenly. I'd call that providential rather than scandalous. The widow's expression softened slightly. Shooting, in broad daylight, she cast a questioning glance at Matt. Someone took exception to Miss Ravenwood's presence in town, he explained, removing his hat as he spoke. I thought it prudent to escort her back safely. Well, I suppose that's different. Mrs. Simmons stepped aside. You may use the parlor for your conversation, but the door stays open, mind you. Matt nodded respectfully. Much obliged, madam. The parlor was a tidy room with horsehair furniture, antimacassars on every chair back, and a collection of china figurines displayed on the mantelpiece. Mercy took a seat on the sofa while Matt remained standing, hat in hand, looking uncomfortably out of place among the delicate furnishings. Please sit, Mercy said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Matt complied reluctantly, perching on the edge of the seat as if expecting to need to move quickly. Blackwater Mining Company arrived about 2 years ago, he began without preamble. Started buying up land around the creek. At first, the prices they offered were fair enough that most didn't mind selling. But that changed, Matt nodded grimly. Once they controlled most of the water access, they started pressuring the holdouts. Cattle would go missing, fences would get cut. Strange accidents would befall any ranch hand who stood up to Blackwater's men. Mercy was writing rapidly in her notebook. And the Sheriff Taylor was elected last year with Blackwater's backing. Before that, he was their head of security. Matt's voice hardened. Any complaints against the company mysteriously disappear from his office. What about the 3 dead homesteaders? The Wallace family was found shot in their beds. Sheriff ruled it a murder-suicide, said Frank Wallace killed his wife and daughter, then himself. Nobody who knew Frank believed it. Matt leaned forward, lowering his voice. 2 weeks later, Old Man Jenkins was found hanging from his own barn rafters. Then last week, the Peterson place burned down with Peterson still inside. 3 holdout families, 3 accidents. All had refused Blackwater's final offers the day before. Mercy's pencil stilled. And your ranch? We're the last large spread standing. 20,000 acres, been in my family since before the war. My father died last winter. Blackwater made their offer the day after his funeral. Matt's knuckles whitened around the brim of his hat. I told them I'd see them in hell first. That's when the trouble started for you. Started. Matt gave a humorless laugh. Miss Ravenwood, I've been living with trouble for months. 3 ranch hands quit after being beaten in town. My foreman was shot at while checking fences. Last month, someone poisoned my south pasture watering hole, lost 40 head of cattle. And yet you've stayed. It's my home, he said simply. Quinn land. My father's bones are in that soil and his father's before him. Mercy studied him, seeing beyond the dust and trail-worn appearance to the determination beneath. How many men do you have left working for you? 4. Good men, loyal, but we're stretched thin watching 20,000 acres. And Blackwater, how many men do they employ? The mine itself has maybe 60 workers. Their security force, what most of us call their hired guns, numbers about 20. Matt sighed. Plus whatever local muscle they've bought with promises or threats. Mercy finished her notes, tapping her pencil against the page. I'll need to speak with the families of the deceased, if any remain. Wallace's brother took in his niece-only survivor because she was staying with him that night. Jenkins has a son in Denver. Peterson was alone in the world, far as anyone knew. And what about Blackwater's leadership? Who runs their operation here? A man named Victor Harrington. Eastern money, Harvard education, wears suits that cost more than most men make in a year. Matt's expression darkened. Never gets his hands dirty, but blood runs from everything he touches all the same. I'll need to interview him as well. Matt shook his head emphatically. That's not happening. Man like that won't talk to a reporter, especially one asking questions about dead ranchers. We'll see, Mercy said with quiet determination. Where does Harrington reside? Big house on the hill north of town. White columns, iron fence, can't miss it. Matt leaned forward. Miss Ravenwood, Mercy, I agreed to help you navigate this town, not lead you to your death. Approaching Harrington directly is suicide. Then how do you suggest I proceed? Matt considered this. Start with people who might talk. Town doctor had to sign off on the death certificates. Might have seen something that didn't match the official story. Reverend Phillips conducted the funerals, Wallace and Jenkins anyway. Peterson was buried without ceremony. Good suggestions, Mercy nodded. What about the land office? They would have records of the property transfers. Clerk there is named Edward Miles. Nervous sort, but honest as far as I can tell. Blackwater hasn't replaced him yet, which means they've found ways to work around him or pressure him. Mercy closed her notebook and tucked it into her handbag. Thank you, Matt. This gives me somewhere to begin tomorrow. Not alone, he reminded her. I'll come by after I check on my ranch in the morning. That won't be necessary. I'm quite capable. I don't doubt your capabilities, Miss Ravenwood. It's Blackwater's I'm concerned about. Matt stood, settling his hat back on his head. Besides, folks might be more willing to talk if I'm with you. I'm a known quantity around here. Mercy wanted to argue but couldn't deny the logic. Very well, but please call me Mercy if I'm to call you Matt. Miss Ravenwood makes me feel like a schoolteacher. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Mercy, then. He nodded toward Mrs. Simmons, who was pretending not to eavesdrop from the hallway. I'll return at 9 tomorrow. Keep your door locked tonight. After Matt left, Mrs. Simmons bustled into the parlor, straightening cushions that didn't need straightening. That Quinn boy has had a hard time of it, she said conversationally. Father was a good man, built that ranch from nothing. Shame how things have gone since Blackwater arrived. Mercy seized the opportunity. You've lived in Redemption Creek a long time, Mrs. Simmons. All my life, dear. Born here when it was just a trading post and a few cabins. The older woman's hands stilled on the antimacassar. Seen it grow, seen it change, some for better, some for worse. And Blackwater's arrival, better or worse, Mrs. Simmons' mouth formed a thin line. They brought money, sure enough. New businesses, more people, but they brought other things too, things that don't belong in a decent town. Such as, the widow glanced toward the window, men who carry guns for purposes other than hunting or protection, women of loose virtue at that new saloon, gambling that ruins families. She shook her head. And a meanness, Miss Ravenwood, a cold, calculating meanness that wasn't here before. Did you know the families who died? The Wallaces, Jenkins, Peterson, known them all my life, Mrs. Simmons replied softly. Frank Wallace taught my boys in Sunday school. Old Jenkins played fiddle at every town dance for 30 years. Peterson kept to himself, but he'd bring fresh vegetables to anyone who took sick. Her eyes grew moist. Good people, not the sort who end their own lives or die by accident. Then why does no one speak out? The widow gave Mercy a long, measured look. Fear, Miss Ravenwood, powerful thing fear, especially when you've seen what happens to those who stand against the tide. She straightened her apron. Supper's at 6. Don't be late. I don't hold meals for tardy boarders. With that, Mrs. Simmons left Mercy alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that she had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple land dispute. Later that night, as Mercy prepared for bed in her small but comfortable room, a pebble struck her window. Cautiously, she peered through the curtains to see Matt Quinn standing in the shadows below, motioning for her to open the window. "What are you doing here?" she whispered once she'd raised the sash a few inches. "Trouble at my ranch," he replied tersely. "Someone set fire to my barn tonight. Lost most of our hay stores. Was anyone hurt?" "No, thank God, but it's a message." Matt's face was grim in the moonlight. "They're escalating. Because you helped me today, likely so." He glanced up and down the dark street. "Just wanted to warn you, be extra careful. They're sending signals that they're willing to move against me. Might not stop there." "Perhaps our partnership was ill-advised," Mercy suggested, a pang of guilt tightening her chest. "Bit late for that now." Matt adjusted his hat. "I was already in their sights. Difference is now we might actually accomplish something besides getting buried on my ranch." "What will you do now?" "Head back. My men are standing watch, but," he shrugged, "it's my responsibility." "Be careful, Matt." Something softened in his expression. "Get some sleep, Mercy. Tomorrow's likely to be a long day." As she watched him disappear into the darkness, Mercy realized that in less than 24 hours in Redemption Creek, she'd found both a story worth telling and a man unlike any she'd met before, one who might very well be risking his life simply by associating with her. Sleep was a long time coming that night. True to his word, Matt arrived at the boarding house at 9 the next morning, though Mercy nearly didn't recognize him. Gone was the dust-covered cowboy of yesterday, replaced by a man in clean denims, a pressed shirt, and a newer-looking hat. He'd shaved, revealing a strong jawline previously hidden by stubble, and his dark hair was neatly combed. Only his eyes remained unchanged, alert, wary, and startlingly blue. "You clean up well, Mr. Quinn," Mercy remarked as she joined him on the porch, notebook and pencil already in hand. "Figured if we're interviewing folks, might as well not look like I just rode in from a cattle drive," he replied. Dark smudges under his eyes told of a sleepless night. "Where to first?" "The doctor, I think. Then perhaps the Reverend." Matt nodded. "Doc Miller's office is just down the street. Decent man, though he drinks more than he should these days." They walked side by side down the boardwalk, drawing curious glances from townspeople. Mercy noticed how Matt positioned himself between her and the street, his right hand never straying far from the holstered Colt at his hip. "Did you manage to save anything from your barn?" she asked quietly. "Structure's gone, but we saved the horses and most of the equipment." His expression tightened. "Winter will be hard without that hay, though." "I'm sorry, Matt. If there's any way I can help, you can help by finding evidence that links Blackwater to these attacks." He glanced down at her. "That's what you came for, isn't it? The truth?" "Yes," she agreed. "The truth, whatever it might be, Doctor." Miller's office occupied a small building wedged between the general store and the telegraph office. A bell jangled as they entered, and a moment later, a man in his 50s emerged from a back room, wiping his hands on a towel. His face was flushed, his eyes slightly bloodshot. "Matt Quinn," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Haven't seen you in town in weeks. Not sick, are you?" "Healthy as a horse, Doc. This is Miss Mercy Ravenwood from the Denver Chronicle. She's writing about recent events in Redemption Creek." The doctor's demeanor changed instantly, his expression shuddering. "I don't talk to newspapers. Good day to you both." He turned to leave, but Mercy stepped forward. "Dr. Miller, I'm specifically investigating the deaths of the Wallace family, Mr. Jenkins and Mr. Peterson. As the physician who examined them, your insights would be invaluable. Official reports have been filed. Read those." He wouldn't meet her eyes. Reports that call Frank Wallace's death a suicide, despite the fact that he was a devout man with no history of melancholy, Mercy pressed. Reports that label Jenkins' hanging a suicide as well, though I understand he had just written to his son about fighting Blackwater's takeover of his land. Dr. Miller's hands trembled slightly. I signed what I was told to sign. By Sheriff Taylor? Matt asked quietly. The doctor's eyes darted to the door. This conversation is over. Please leave before you bring trouble to my door as well. There was something wrong with those deaths, wasn't there? Mercy persisted. Something that didn't match the official story, Doctor. Miller hesitated, conflict evident on his face. Finally, he spoke in a near whisper. Frank Wallace was shot behind his right ear. Man was left-handed. Think on that. He opened the door. Now go and don't come back. Outside, Matt guided Mercy away from the doctor's office with a hand at the small of her back. That went better than I expected, he muttered. He's terrified, Mercy observed, hastily noting the doctor's revelation in her notebook. With good reason, but he gave you something. A left-handed man shot in the right side of his head couldn't have killed himself, Mercy said. That's a clear contradiction of the suicide ruling. Enough to raise questions in your article, but not enough to prove murder, Matt cautioned. We need more. They found Reverend Phillips tending the small church garden, a peaceful spot shaded by cottonwood trees. He was a thin man with kind eyes and work-roughened hands that spoke of a life not always spent in clergy. Unlike the doctor, the Reverend welcomed them openly, though his face grew solemn when Mercy explained her purpose. 3 good families gone in such terrible ways, he said, removing his gardening gloves. A tragedy for our community. Did you have any reason to believe Frank Wallace was considering taking his own life? Mercy asked directly. The Reverend's response was immediate and firm. None whatsoever. Frank was a pillar of our congregation, a man of deep faith. He had recently spoken of plans to expand his farm come spring. He shook his head. When Sheriff Taylor told me it was suicide, I could scarcely believe it. What about Jenkins? Another good man. No, Miss Ravenwood, neither of these deaths were self-inflicted. That is my firm belief, though I can offer no proof beyond my knowledge of their characters. And the official investigations? Matt asked. Reverend Phillips' expression hardened slightly. Brief, cursory, the sheriff seemed more interested in closing the cases quickly than finding truth. He lowered his voice. I suggested to Mayor Williams that perhaps an outside investigator should be brought in. The next day, my church donation box was stolen and my home vandalized. You believe these were connected? I believe there are no coincidences in Redemption Creek anymore, Mr. Quinn. Not since Blackwater arrived. As they left the church, Mercy's notebook was filling with testimonies that contradicted the official narrative, yet still lacked the concrete evidence she needed. Their next stop was the land office, where Clerk Edward Miles nervously showed them property records while constantly glancing toward the door. All the transfers appear legally executed, he said, pushing his spectacles up his nose. Proper signatures, witnessed and notarized. Mercy examined the documents carefully. The final sales prices for the Wallace, Jenkins, and Peterson properties are identical to the penny. That seems unusual for properties of different sizes and values. Miles swallowed hard. I wouldn't know about that. And all 3 sales were finalized the day after each death, she continued, flipping through the papers. Rather expedient timing. The company had standing offers, the clerk explained weakly. When property ownership transferred to next of kin upon death, Blackwater simply renewed the offers. And who signed for the deceased? Matt asked. In Wallace's case, his brother, though he seemed reluctant. Jenkins' son came from Denver specifically to handle the matter. Peterson had named the bank as executor in his will. May I see the will? Miles hesitated, then retrieved another document. It's unusual, I'll grant you that, dated just a week before his death. Mercy scanned the will, her brow furrowing. This appoints First Bank of Redemption Creek as executor and directs them to accept any reasonable offer for his land. That's extraordinarily vague for a legal document. The bank president assured me it was properly executed, Miles said defensively. And who is the bank president? Mercy asked, though she suspected the answer. Mr. Victor Harrington serves on the board, but the day-to-day operations are managed by Mr. James Foster, who previously worked as Blackwater's accountant, Matt added grimly. By midday, they had gathered considerable circumstantial evidence, but nothing that directly implicated Blackwater in wrongdoing. As they sat in the town's small cafe for lunch, Mercy reviewed her notes with growing frustration. Everyone knows what happened, but no one can or will prove it, she said, pushing her barely touched stew aside. Welcome to Redemption Creek, Matt replied dryly. Truth's become a rare commodity around here. We need to speak with Wallace's brother and niece, Mercy decided. They might have more to tell us. Matt shook his head. They left town 3 days after selling the property. No one knows where they went. Jenkins' son, then. Back in Denver, I'd imagine. Mercy tapped her pencil against her notebook. That leaves us with direct confrontation. I need to speak with Harrington. Absolutely not, Matt said firmly. Man's dangerous, Mercy. He won't just turn you away, he'll make sure you never ask questions again. Then what do you suggest? I can't write this story without giving him a chance to respond to these allegations. Matt was quiet for a moment, considering. There's a Blackwater Company party tomorrow night, big to-do at Harrington's mansion. All the town officials will be there, celebrating the completion of the new mine shaft. Perfect, Mercy said, brightening. I'll attend and speak with him there. It's invitation only, heavily guarded, and you're the last person he'd want present. Then you'll have to get me in, she replied simply. Matt stared at her as if she'd suggested robbing a bank. And how exactly am I supposed to do that? Surely you received an invitation. As one of the last major landowners in the area, Blackwater would want to keep up appearances by including you. He shifted uncomfortably. I did, but I had no intention of attending. Well, now you do, Mercy said with determination, and you'll bring me as your guest. That's madness. Everyone in town knows you're a reporter by now. Mercy leaned forward, her green eyes intent. Then we'll give them something else to talk about, meaning. Instead of Matthew Quinn escorting reporter Mercy Ravenwood, it will be Matt Quinn bringing his sweetheart from Denver to the social event of the season. She held up a hand as he began to protest. It's perfect cover. No one would expect a woman investigating Blackwater to arrive on the arm of one of their most vocal opponents. Matt looked thoroughly uncomfortable with the suggestion. That's inappropriate. More inappropriate than arson, than murder disguised as suicide, Mercy challenged. This is just a role we're playing, Matt, to get to the truth. After a long moment, he sighed heavily. Fine, but we'll need a better story than Sweetheart from Denver. This town thrives on gossip they'll see through vague explanations. We met last year when I came through Wyoming researching a story on cattle drives, Mercy suggested. We've been corresponding since, and I've come to visit before potentially moving west permanently. Detailed enough to be believable, Matt conceded, but you'll need different clothes. That practical ensemble screams working woman, not prospective rancher's wife. Mercy glanced down at her serviceable traveling dress. I didn't exactly pack for a society ball. There's a dressmaker in town, Mrs. Caldwell. She could probably alter something suitable by tomorrow evening. All this for a chance to question Harrington directly, Mercy mused. Let's hope it's worth the effort. It's a risk, Matt said bluntly. If he realizes who you really are, then I'll have my gallant escort to protect me, she replied with more confidence than she felt. Now let's visit Mrs. Caldwell before word of yesterday's shooting makes her reluctant to help me. The dressmaker turned out to be a chatty woman with nimble fingers and a shop full of fabric and partially completed garments. When Matt explained they needed something suitable for Harrington's party the following evening, her eyes lit up with professional challenge. For you, Mr. Quinn? My goodness, I never thought I'd see the day you attended one of those affairs. She looked Mercy up and down appraisingly. And for your lady friend, no less. How romantic, Mercy smiled warmly. Matt has spoken so much of Redemption Creek in his letters. When he invited me to visit, I simply couldn't resist. Mrs. Caldwell beamed. Letters, how lovely, and now a grand party. Well, we must make sure you outshine every other woman there. For the next hour, Mercy was measured, draped, and pinned into a midnight blue silk gown that Mrs. Caldwell had been creating for another client who had left town unexpectedly. With a few alterations, it would fit Mercy perfectly. The color brings out the green in your eyes, the dressmaker declared, and shows off that beautiful auburn hair. Mr. Quinn won't be able to take his eyes off you. Matt, looking decidedly uncomfortable in a chair by the door, cleared his throat. It's very nice. Mercy caught his gaze in the mirror and was surprised by the genuine appreciation she saw there before he quickly looked away. Something fluttered in her stomach that had nothing to do with her investigation. We'll need to fix your hair as well, Mrs. Caldwell continued, oblivious to the moment. That practical style won't do for Harrington's mansion. Perhaps Mrs. Simmons can help. She was quite the lady's maid in her younger days before she married. By the time they left the shop, with promises to return for a final fitting the next day, word of their supposed romance had already begun to spread. Mercy noticed heads turning and whispers following them as they walked back toward the boarding house. "You'll get yourself talked about being seen with me like this," Matt muttered, tipping his hat to an elderly couple who were openly staring. "Then let them talk about Mercy," she replied with a small smile, deliberately loud enough to be overheard. "I don't mind being the subject of conversation if it's about how fortunate I am to have caught the attention of Redemption Creek's most handsome rancher." Matt's ears reddened, but he played along, placing his hand over hers where it rested on his arm. "Fortunate is my word for it, not yours," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach nearby eavesdroppers. Their performance had the desired effect. By evening, Mrs. Simmons informed Mercy that the whole town is talking about you and the Quinn boy. Her disapproval from the previous day transformed into barely concealed delight at hosting a budding romance under her roof. "He's quite a catch, dear," the widow confided as she helped Mercy pin her hair in preparation for their dress fitting the next morning. "One of the few decent men left in this town, and certainly the most prosperous, despite Blackwater's efforts to ruin him." "He's been very kind," Mercy replied carefully. "Kind," Mrs. Simmons chuckled. "Matt Quinn isn't known for kindness to strangers, dear. If he's being kind to you, there's more to it than courtesy." Mercy wasn't sure how to respond to that, but was saved by a knock at the front door. Mrs. Simmons hurried downstairs, returning moments later with a troubled expression. "It's Sheriff Taylor," she said quietly. "He's asking to speak with you." Mercy's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "Please show him to the parlor. I'll be right down." Sheriff Elias Taylor was a tall, hard-faced man with cold eyes and a badge that seemed more threat than protection. He stood as Mercy entered the parlor, removing his hat with calculated politeness. "Miss Ravenwood," he said, his voice deceptively pleasant. "I understand there was some trouble your first day in town. Gunshots near Parker's General Store." "Yes, Sheriff. Someone fired at me from across the street." "Strange that you didn't report this incident to my office." Mercy met his gaze evenly. "I assumed Mr. Quinn would have done so as he witnessed the event." "Quinn," Taylor repeated, his mouth tightening. "Yes, I heard you two have become acquainted quite rapidly, it seems. Mr. Quinn was kind enough to show me around town." "I'm sure he was." The sheriff placed his hat back on his head. "Miss Ravenwood, I feel obligated to inform you that associating with certain elements in Redemption Creek might give people the wrong impression about your character and intentions." "By certain elements, you mean one of the town's oldest and most respected ranching families?" Mercy asked innocently. Taylor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The Quinn name isn't what it once was. Matt's father was respected, true enough. The son, however, has developed a reputation for troublemaking since Blackwater began its legitimate business operations here. Legitimate business operations that somehow coincide with 3 deaths in as many months." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Careful, Miss Ravenwood. Newspaper credentials don't give you license to slander respected businessmen or question official investigations." "I'm simply gathering information for my article, Sheriff, as any good reporter would do." "Then let me give you some information," Taylor said, stepping closer. "This is a peaceful town that's finally seeing prosperity after years of struggle. The only ones disrupting that peace are malcontents who resist progress and spread vicious rumors." He tapped his badge meaningfully. "As sheriff, I take my duty to maintain order very seriously. That includes dealing with outside agitators. Mercy stood her ground despite her racing heart. Are you threatening me, Sheriff Taylor? Threatening? No, madam, just making sure we understand each other. He moved toward the door. Enjoy your stay in Redemption Creek, Miss Ravenwood. However long it lasts. After the sheriff left, Mercy sat down, her legs suddenly weak. The veiled threat had been unmistakable. Whatever she and Matt were investigating, they had stirred up a hornet's nest, and the danger was growing by the hour. That evening, Matt came to check on her, his face grim when she told him about the sheriff's visit. They're watching us closely now, he said, pacing the small parlor. The shooting, the barn fire, the sheriff's warning, they're escalating because they're worried. Worried about what we might discover, or what you might publish. Matt stopped pacing. Blackwater depends on Eastern investors who care about their reputations. Scandal in a major newspaper like the Chronicle could dry up that money. Then we must be on the right track, Mercy said with more confidence than she felt. Maybe. Matt sat down across from her, his expression troubled. But I'm more concerned about keeping you alive long enough to write your story. Us, Mercy corrected. Keeping us alive. Something changed in Matt's eyes, a softening that made Mercy's breath catch. Yes, he said quietly. Us. The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken thoughts, until Mrs. Simmons bustled in with coffee, breaking the spell. That night, Mercy lay awake for hours, her mind racing with everything they'd learned and everything they hadn't. But increasingly, her thoughts drifted to Matt Quinn, a man she'd known for barely 2 days yet trusted with her life. A man who, despite his initial reluctance, had risked everything to help her uncover the truth. A man who, she was beginning to realize, stirred feelings in her that had nothing to do with her investigation and everything to do with the person he was: honorable, brave, and unexpectedly gentle despite his rough exterior. Tomorrow they would attend Harrington's party and potentially walk into the lion's den together. Whatever happened there would change the course of her story and perhaps much more. The following evening arrived with a flurry of activity. Mrs. Simmons, taking her role as impromptu lady's maid seriously, helped Mercy into the altered gown and arranged her auburn hair in an elegant upswept style with soft curls framing her face. There, the widow said, stepping back to admire her work. Mr. Quinn won't know what hit him. Mercy studied her reflection in the small vanity mirror, barely recognizing herself. The midnight blue silk complemented her fair skin and brought out the green of her eyes, while the modest yet fashionable cut flattered her slender figure in ways her practical work clothes never had. Mrs. Caldwell did a magnificent job with such short notice, she said, smoothing the skirt nervously. The dress is lovely, dear, but it's the woman wearing it that makes the impression. Mrs. Simmons patted her shoulder. Now I believe your gentleman caller has arrived. Matt was waiting in the parlor, and Mercy had to pause in the doorway at the sight of him. Gone was the ranch-worn cowboy, replaced by a striking figure in a black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face cleanly shaven, revealing the strong line of his jaw. Only his eyes remained unchanged, those piercing blue eyes that now widened as he caught sight of her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Matt cleared his throat. You look beautiful, he said simply, the sincerity in his voice making the compliment more meaningful than any flowery praise. Thank you, Mercy replied, a flush warming her cheeks. You clean up rather nicely yourself, Mr. Quinn. He offered his arm with a small bow. Shall we, Miss Ravenwood? Our carriage awaits. Carriage? She asked, surprised. Can't have my lady walking to Harrington's mansion in her finest, he said, loud enough for Mrs. Simmons to hear. Then, lowering his voice as they stepped outside, he added, besides, we may need to leave quickly depending on how this goes. The hired carriage took them through town and up the winding road to Harrington's estate on the hill. As they approached, Mercy could see the mansion ablaze with light, its white columns and expansive veranda making it look like a southern plantation transported to the Wyoming wilderness. Carriages lined the circular drive, disgorging finely dressed couples who made their way inside. Remember, Matt murmured as they joined the procession, You're Mercy Ravenwood, my sweetheart from Denver, visiting with thoughts of settling permanently in Redemption Creek. No mention of newspapers or investigations. I know my role, she assured him, though her heart pounded as they reached the door and presented their invitation to a stiff-backed butler. Mr. Matthew Quinn and Miss Mercy Ravenwood, the butler announced as they entered a grand foyer where dozens of guests mingled, the men in dark suits, the women in colorful silks and satins. Conversations faltered briefly as heads turned to observe the new arrivals, surprise evident on many faces at the sight of the notorious holdout rancher attending a Blackwater celebration. Quite the reception committee, Mercy whispered, plastering a smile on her face. Told you I don't get out much, Matt replied through his own fixed smile, guiding her further into the room with a protective hand at the small of her back. They had barely taken a dozen steps when a tall, elegantly dressed man with silver at his temples and calculating eyes approached them, a champagne glass held casually in one manicured hand. "Mr. Quinn," he said, his cultured voice carrying a hint of Eastern refinement. "This is an unexpected pleasure. I'd almost given up hope of seeing you at one of our little gatherings." "Mr. Harrington," Matt replied stiffly, "may I present Miss Mercy Ravenwood, recently of Denver." Victor Harrington's sharp gaze assessed Mercy with practiced charm that didn't quite mask the predatory intelligence behind his smile. "Miss Ravenwood, a delight to welcome you to our humble community." He raised her gloved hand to his lips. "And to what do we owe the pleasure of your presence in Redemption Creek? Personal interests, Mr. Harrington," she replied smoothly. "Mr. Quinn and I have been corresponding for some time. When he invited me to visit, I simply couldn't refuse corresponding." Harrington's eyebrows rose as he glanced between them. "How fascinating. Our Mr. Quinn has always struck me as more comfortable with cattle than correspondence." Matt's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. "There's a great deal about me you don't know, Harrington." "Evidently so." The mine owner's smile turned calculating. "Well, this explains the rumors circulating through town, the confirmed bachelor and the mysterious beauty from Denver. Quite the romantic tale." "We're merely getting reacquainted," Mercy said, placing her hand on Matt's arm in a gesture of easy familiarity. "Though I must say, Redemption Creek has made quite an impression on me." "Has it indeed?" Harrington's eyes narrowed slightly. "I do hope it's been a positive impression." "We've worked hard to transform this backwater into something civilized." "Civilized is an interesting choice of words," Matt commented. "Some might use different terms to describe recent developments." The tension between the two men was palpable, and Mercy intervened before it could escalate. "The changes are certainly dramatic, Mr. Harrington. I understand your company has acquired considerable property in the area. Progress requires expansion, Miss Ravenwood. Fortunately, most local landowners have recognized the benefits of our presence." Harrington's gaze hardened as he looked at Matt. "Most, but not all, yet. Some land isn't for sale at any price," Matt replied evenly, "particularly when it's been in a family for generations. Everything has its price, Mr. Quinn. It's simply a matter of finding the correct figure or the correct motivation." Harrington smiled thinly. "But let's not bore your lovely companion with business talk. Please enjoy the party. The buffet is excellent and the orchestra has come all the way from Denver for the occasion." With a slight bow, he moved away to greet other guests, leaving Mercy and Matt standing in tense silence. "Charming man," Mercy muttered under her breath. "Like a snake with a vocabulary. That's him being pleasant," Matt replied grimly. "You can see why I was concerned about you confronting him directly." They circulated through the crowd, accepting champagne from passing servers but barely sipping it. Mercy noted how the townspeople divided clearly into two camps: those who greeted Matt warmly, often with meaningful looks of support, and those who pointedly avoided them or offered only the coldest acknowledgments. "The battle lines are clearly drawn," she observed quietly. "Have been for months," Matt confirmed. "Though folks are usually less obvious about taking sides, your presence has stirred things up." Throughout the evening, Mercy carefully engaged various guests in conversation, piecing together more background on Blackwater's operations and the changes in town. She was particularly interested in James Foster, the bank president who had facilitated the transfer of Peterson's property. They found him by the punch bowl, a nervous man with thinning hair who nearly spilled his drink when Matt addressed him. "Mr. Quinn, and Miss Ravenwood, is it? Lovely to make your acquaintance." His forced joviality couldn't mask his discomfort. "Enjoying the party?" "Immensely," Mercy replied with a warm smile. "I was just telling Matt how fascinating I find the economic development of Western towns. You must have a unique perspective as bank president." Foster preened slightly at her interest. "Well, yes, I suppose I do. Banking is the lifeblood of development, after all, especially when it comes to property transfers," she continued conversationally. "Matt mentioned you handled poor Mr. Peterson's estate after his tragic accident." Foster's expression froze. "Did he?" "Well, yes, standard procedure when serving as executor. Everything was handled according to the deceased's wishes. It's fortunate he updated his will so recently before the fire," Mercy remarked, almost as if he had a premonition. "Yes, quite fortunate." Foster's eyes darted nervously around the room. "If you'll excuse me, I see Sheriff Taylor beckoning. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Ravenwood." As Foster practically fled their presence, Matt guided Mercy toward a quieter corner of the room. "You've frightened the man half to death." "Good," Mercy said, her voice hardening. "He knows something about Peterson's will. Did you see his reaction?" "I did. But confronting these people directly is dangerous, Mercy." "Sometimes the only way to find truth is to provoke reaction," she replied. "Speaking of which, Harrington is watching us, has been all evening." Matt glanced casually in the mine owner's direction. "He's not the only one. Sheriff Taylor hasn't taken his eyes off you since we arrived." "Then perhaps we should give them something else to focus on," Mercy suggested. "The orchestra is playing. Would you care to dance, Mr. Quinn?" Matt looked startled. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Nor am I," she admitted. "But we're supposed to be sweethearts, aren't we? It would seem odd if we didn't share at least one dance." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, leading her to the area where other couples were already moving to the gentle strains of a waltz. His hand settled at her waist, warm and steady, as he guided her into the steps with surprising grace. "You dance better than you claimed," Mercy observed, looking up at him. "My mother's insistence," he replied, a hint of sadness crossing his features. "She said no son of hers would grow up without knowing how to properly escort a lady across a dance floor. She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Matt's eyes softened with memory. "Died when I was 15, influenza. I'm sorry, long time ago now." He guided her through a turn, his movements confident despite his earlier disclaimer. "What about your family? Do they worry about their daughter chasing dangerous stories in the West?" Mercy shook her head slightly. "My father died in the war. My mother remarried and moved to Boston with her new husband. We don't correspond often. She never approved of my career choice. Journalism not respectable enough for Boston society. Not for a woman," Mercy clarified. "She wanted me to marry well and host tea parties, not travel unchaperoned asking impertinent questions of dangerous men." A smile tugged at the corner of Matt's mouth. "Can't imagine why that would concern her." Mercy laughed softly, suddenly aware of how close they were, how naturally they moved together. "And what about you, Mr. Quinn? No wife waiting at your ranch?" "No," he replied simply. "Running the ranch after my father died left little time for courting, and lately," he shrugged, "fighting Blackwater has been a full-time occupation. A lonely one from the sound of it." Something unreadable flickered in his eyes. "Sometimes the right cause is worth the solitude. And sometimes the right person makes the cause less solitary," Mercy said softly, surprising herself with the sentiment. The music drew to a close, but they remained for a moment, still holding each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Matt blinked, as if coming back to himself, and stepped away with a small bow. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Ravenwood. The pleasure was mine, Mr. Quinn." As they made their way from the dance floor, Mercy noticed several people watching them with open interest, some approving, others calculating. Their performance as a courting couple was clearly convincing, perhaps because, she realized with a jolt, not all of it was entirely feigned on her part. They were approaching the refreshment table when a commotion at the entrance caught everyone's attention. A man in dusty trail clothes burst into the room, ignoring the butler's protests, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Matt. "Quinn," he called, pushing past shocked guests. "The ranch, they've hit the ranch." Matt was across the room in seconds, gripping the man's shoulders. "Dawson, what happened?" "Riders, 6, maybe 8 of them," Dawson gasped, his face streaked with sweat and soot. "They came just after sundown, set fire to the house this time." "We managed to get most of it out, but anyone hurt?" Matt demanded, his face pale. "Jenkins took a bullet in the shoulder. Doc Richards is with him. The rest of us are okay, but they scattered the herd," Quinn drove at least 100 head into the hills. A hush had fallen over the party as the guests watched the drama unfold. Mercy pushed her way to Matt's side, placing a hand on his arm. "You need to go," she said quietly. Matt nodded, his expression hardened into something dangerous. "Where's Harrington?" he demanded, scanning the room. The mine owner stepped forward, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Quinn, this is most distressing. I assure you Blackwater had nothing to do with this unfortunate incident." "Save your assurances," Matt snarled. "We both know exactly who's responsible." Harrington's facade of sympathy vanished. "Careful, Quinn, that sounds dangerously like slander." Sheriff Taylor appeared at Harrington's side. "Maybe you should get back to your ranch, Quinn, instead of throwing around accusations you can't prove." "Oh, I'll be proving plenty," Matt promised, his voice low and deadly. "Count on it." He turned to Mercy. "I have to go, I know. I'll come with you." "No," he shook his head firmly. "It's too dangerous. Stay here in town where there are witnesses." Before she could argue, Sheriff Taylor stepped forward. "Actually, Miss Ravenwood, I think it would be best if you remained as well. In fact, I have some additional questions about your presence in Redemption Creek." Matt's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm before he remembered he was unarmed for the social occasion. "She's not staying with you, Taylor." "It's not a request," the sheriff replied, his hand resting meaningfully on his own holstered revolver. The tension in the room was palpable as guests backed away from the confrontation. Mercy knew she had to defuse the situation before it escalated into violence that would only make matters worse. "Matt," she said firmly, squeezing his arm, "go to your ranch. Your men need you. I'll be fine at Mrs. Simmons' boarding house." "You'll be coming with me, Miss Ravenwood," Taylor insisted. "For your own protection, of course." Harrington intervened with practiced smoothness. "Perhaps a compromise. Miss Ravenwood can remain here at the mansion as my guest until this unfortunate business is sorted out. I assure you, Mr. Quinn, she will be quite safe." The suggestion, clearly meant to appear reasonable to the watching crowd, was anything but. Mercy met Matt's eyes, seeing the conflict there, his need to protect his ranch and men warring with his unwillingness to leave her in enemy hands. "I will escort Miss Ravenwood back to her boarding house," came an unexpected voice, and Reverend Phillips stepped forward, his expression resolute. "As a man of the cloth, I believe I can ensure her safety for the night. Sheriff Taylor can speak with her in the morning if necessary." Taylor began to object, but Harrington, evidently realizing the poor optics of refusing the Reverend's offer in front of the town's most prominent citizens, nodded curtly. "A sensible solution. Sheriff, you can continue your inquiries tomorrow." Matt looked to Mercy, who nodded slightly. "Go," she said softly. "I'll be fine with Reverend Phillips." With visible reluctance, Matt turned to his ranch hand. "Dawson, let's go." At the door, he paused, looking back at Mercy with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then he was gone, the sound of galloping horses soon fading into the night. The party dissolved rapidly after the dramatic interruption, guests departing in hushed whispers and speculative glances. True to his word, Reverend Phillips escorted Mercy back to the boarding house, maintaining a protective presence until she was safely inside. "Be careful, Miss Ravenwood," he warned as he prepared to leave. "What happened tonight was no coincidence." Harrington timed that attack to occur during his party to humiliate Quinn publicly when he had to rush out, and to separate you from your protector. "I know," Mercy said grimly, "which means we're getting close to something they don't want revealed." "God be with you both," the Reverend said, placing a fatherly hand on her shoulder. "This town needs the truth, however painful it might be. After he left, Mercy changed quickly from her fine gown into her practical clothes, her mind racing. She was certain Harrington had orchestrated not only the attack on the ranch, but the entire evening to isolate her from Matt. Whether his intention was to intimidate her or worse, she couldn't be sure, but she had no intention of waiting passively to find out. Mrs. Simmons appeared at her door as Mercy was packing her notebook and few belongings into a small bag. "Going somewhere at this hour?" the widow asked, her shrewd eyes taking in Mercy's preparations. "I need to get to the Quinn ranch," Mercy explained. "Mr. Quinn may be in danger." "More likely you'll be in danger traveling alone at night," Mrs. Simmons replied pragmatically. "But if you're determined, at least take the back way." She moved to the window, checking the street below. "Sheriff's deputy has been watching the house since you returned. They'll stop you if you try to leave openly." Mercy was touched by the older woman's understanding. "You don't seem surprised by any of this." "Child, I've lived in this town all my life, seen it change from a place where neighbors helped neighbors to one where fear rules good people's hearts." Mrs. Simmons' expression hardened. "My Henry would roll in his grave if he knew what Redemption Creek has become. If you and that Quinn boy can expose the truth, you'll have my blessing and my help." With the widow's assistance, Mercy slipped out through the boarding house's back entrance and made her way to the livery stable. The sleepy stable boy was reluctant to rent her a horse at such a late hour until she pressed extra money into his hand. "The Quinn Ranch," she told him as he saddled a sturdy mare. "What's the quickest way there? Follow the creek north for about 4 miles, then take the fork west. Can't miss it, big white house with red barn," he paused, "or what's left of it after tonight, word travels fast." Mercy rode out of town cautiously, keeping to side streets until she reached the creek path. The night was clear, the moon providing enough light to follow the trail, but every shadow seemed to hold potential danger. She had never been an accomplished horsewoman, but determination made up for what she lacked in skill as she urged the mare forward. The journey took nearly 2 hours, during which Mercy had ample time to question the wisdom of her impulsive decision. Yet the thought of Matt facing Harrington's men alone, possibly walking into a trap, drove her onward. She smelled the Quinn ranch before she saw it, the acrid scent of smoke lingering in the night air. As she crested a small rise, the property came into view below. The main house, a substantial 2-story structure, stood silhouetted against the starry sky, one wing blackened by fire but the majority still intact. Lanterns glowed from several windows, and men moved about the yard, maintaining a vigilant watch. Mercy approached slowly, calling out before she came too close. "Hello, the house, it's Mercy Ravenwood." A rifle barrel glinted in the moonlight, then lowered as recognition dawned. "Miss Ravenwood, what in tarnation are you doing out here?" The voice belonged to Dawson, the ranch hand who had interrupted the party. He came forward to help her dismount, his expression a mixture of surprise and concern. "I needed to make sure everyone was all right," she explained. "Is Matt here?" "Boss is inside, checking on Jenkins." Dawson took the reins of her horse, eyeing her curiously. "Sheriff let you leave town just like that?" "Not exactly," Mercy admitted. "Where can I find Matt?" Dawson pointed toward the house. "Front parlor's been turned into a sick room. Doc Richards is still here too." The interior of the Quinn Ranch house spoke of generations of careful stewardship, solid furniture, well-worn but quality rugs, family photographs lining the walls. The scent of smoke was stronger inside, mingling with the medicinal smells emanating from the parlor. Matt was standing beside a makeshift cot where a young man lay, his shoulder heavily bandaged. An older man, who must be the doctor, was packing his bag, giving quiet instructions. When Matt glanced up and saw Mercy in the doorway, his expression shifted from exhaustion to disbelief. "Mercy." How he crossed the room in 3 long strides. "What are you doing here? It's not safe." "Nowhere in Redemption Creek is safe right now," she replied. "How is your man?" "Jenkins will recover," Matt said, glancing back at the injured ranch hand. "Bullet went clean through. He was lucky." "And the ranch?" "Fire damage to the east wing, but the structure is sound. We lost some cattle, though not as many as initially feared." His eyes narrowed as he studied her face. "How did you get out of town?" "Taylor had men watching the boarding house. Mrs. Simmons showed me the back way out." She's quite the conspirator when properly motivated. A hint of a smile touched his lips despite the gravity of the situation. You continue to surprise me, Miss Ravenwood. As do you, Mr. Quinn. She glanced around the room. This is a beautiful home. Been in my family for 3 generations. His expression sobered. Nearly lost it tonight. This wasn't just about damaging your property, was it? Mercy asked quietly. It was about separating us, keeping us from comparing what we've learned. Matt nodded grimly. That's my thinking too. Harrington's getting desperate, which means we're close to something important. We need to pool our information, Mercy said. Everything we've gathered over the past 3 days. Agreed, but not tonight. You've had a long ride and it's nearly dawn. Matt guided her from the parlor. I'll have Dawson prepare a room for you. We can talk after you've rested. Mercy wanted to protest, but found herself swaying slightly on her feet, the exhaustion of the past few days catching up with her. Perhaps a few hours' sleep would be wise. The room Matt led her to was simply furnished but comfortable, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and curtains that looked handmade. My mother's room, he explained, a touch of softness entering his voice. Hasn't been used much since she passed, but it's the cleanest one available right now. Thank you, Matt. Mercy hesitated, then placed a hand on his arm. I was worried about you. Something shifted in his gaze, an intensity that made her heart beat faster. I was worried about you too when I had to leave you there. I know. Her voice was barely above a whisper. For a moment they stood close, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Matt stepped back, clearing his throat. Get some rest. I'll have one of the men stand watch outside, just in case. After he left, Mercy sat on the edge of the bed, her mind whirling despite her fatigue. In just 3 days, her life had become entangled with Matt Quinn's in ways she had never anticipated. What had begun as a professional investigation had become something far more personal and dangerous. And somewhere in the midst of bullets and threats and midnight rides, she had begun to care deeply for the stubborn, honorable rancher who had risked everything to help her uncover the truth. Sleep claimed her eventually, but her dreams were filled with fire and shadowy figures and Matt's blue eyes watching over her. Mercy awoke to late morning sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, she was disoriented, then remembered the events of the previous night. She rose quickly, splashed water on her face from the basin provided, and did her best to make herself presentable before venturing downstairs. She found Matt in what appeared to be his study, poring over documents spread across a large desk. He looked up as she entered, fatigue evident in the shadows under his eyes. Did you get any sleep at all? She asked by way of greeting, an hour or 2. He gestured to the papers before him. Been going through my father's records, looking for anything that might help us understand what Blackwater wants so desperately. And have you found anything? Matt pushed a faded map toward her. This is a survey my grandfather had done back in the 1840s before Wyoming was even a territory. See these markings along the creek that runs through our property? Mercy leaned over the map, studying the notations. Gold deposits, that's what I thought at first, but look at the description. He pointed to handwritten notes in the margin. Black rock that burns, coal, possibly. Or something else. Matt shuffled through more papers. My father corresponded with a geologist from Denver about 15 years ago. The man visited the ranch, took samples from the creek bed, but I can't find any record of his conclusions. Mercy sat down across from him, her reporter's instincts buzzing. So Blackwater might be after more than just land for cattle. It would explain why they've focused so intently on properties along the creek watershed. Matt ran a hand through his hair. The mining operations they've established so far are all within a mile of the water. I always assumed it was for processing ore, but what if they're looking for something specific in the creek bed itself? Something valuable enough to kill for, Mercy mused. She opened her notebook, flipping to her interview notes. When I spoke with the land clerk, he mentioned that all 3 murdered homesteaders had property that bordered the creek, just like your ranch. Matt's expression darkened. If there's something valuable under our land, my father never mentioned it. He was a cattleman through and through, wouldn't have cared about minerals unless they helped the grass grow. But Harrington would care, Mercy said, especially if it's something rare or particularly valuable. They spent the morning compiling everything they knew, every rumor, every suspicious circumstance, every inconsistency in the official narratives about the deaths. Mercy's journalist training helped organize the information systematically, while Matt's intimate knowledge of the area and its people provided context. By midday, they had constructed a compelling circumstantial case against Blackwater Mining Company, but still lacked the smoking gun that would definitively link Harrington to the murders and land seizures. "It's enough to raise serious questions in your article," Matt said, pushing back from the desk, "but not enough to bring charges or stop them legally." Mercy tapped her pencil against her notebook. "There must be something we're missing. Some piece of evidence that would explain why they're moving so aggressively now after 2 years of gradual expansion." A knock at the study door interrupted their discussion. Dawson entered, his expression tense. "Riders coming, boss. Looks like Sheriff Taylor and about 6 deputies." Matt rose quickly. "How far out?" 10 minutes, maybe less. "Get the men armed, but tell them not to shoot unless I give the order." Matt turned to Mercy. "This is it. They're making their move." "What do we do?" she asked, gathering her notes. "We stand our ground. This is my property. They have no legal right to force their way in without cause." Matt checked his revolver, then strapped on his gun belt. "But just in case, there's a trapdoor in the pantry floor that leads to a root cellar and a tunnel that comes out near the creek. If things go badly, Dawson will show you the way out." "I'm not leaving you to face them alone," Mercy protested. Matt's expression softened as he looked at her. "Your job is to tell this story. Remember, if something happens to me, you need to make sure the truth gets out." Before she could respond, he strode from the room, issuing orders to his men as he went. Mercy followed, clutching her notebook, her heart racing with both fear and determination. On the front porch of the Quinn ranch house, Matt stood tall as Sheriff Taylor and his deputies rode into the yard, dust billowing around them. The sheriff dismounted, his hand resting ostentatiously on his holstered weapon. "Matthew Quinn," Taylor called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of threatening bodily harm to Victor Harrington and disrupting the peace." "That's a lie and you know it, Taylor," Matt replied calmly. "I made no threats last night. Got a dozen witnesses who say otherwise." The sheriff smiled thinly. "Including several of the town's most respected citizens." "You mean Harrington's puppets," Matt retorted. "This is private property, Taylor. You're not welcome here." The sheriff held up a folded paper. "This says otherwise. Now you can come peacefully or we can do this the hard way." "Your choice." Mercy stepped forward, positioning herself beside Matt. "Sheriff Taylor, as a journalist for the Denver Chronicle, I feel compelled to inform you that I've documented numerous irregularities in your department's handling of recent deaths in Redemption Creek. Any action you take against Mr. Quinn today will be included in my forthcoming article." Taylor's eyes narrowed. "Miss Ravenwood, I might have guessed you'd be here." He turned to his deputies. "Add harboring a fugitive to the charges." Miss Ravenwood left town against direct orders to remain for questioning. "I was unaware that I was under arrest, Sheriff," Mercy replied evenly. "As a free citizen of the United States, I'm entitled to travel as I please unless charged with a crime." "Interfering with an investigation is a crime," Taylor snapped, "as is suspicion of seditious journalism." "Seditious journalism?" Mercy couldn't help but laugh. "That's not a charge recognized by any court in this country, Sheriff. You might want to consult an actual law book before inventing crimes." The sheriff's face reddened with anger. "Both of you are coming with me, now." Behind Matt, his remaining ranch hands had emerged from the house and outbuildings, rifles in hand. Though outnumbered, their determination was evident in their stance. "Looks like we have a standoff, Taylor," Matt observed. "And I don't think you want to explain to Harrington how you got his men killed over a fraudulent arrest warrant." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention to the road, where a group of riders appeared but not reinforcements for the sheriff. Instead, it was a diverse assortment of townspeople. Reverend Phillips, Mrs. Simmons, Dr. Miller, and at least a dozen ranchers and merchants from Redemption Creek. "What's this?" Taylor demanded as the group reined in their horses. Reverend Phillips dismounted, approaching with dignity. When word reached town that you were riding out to arrest Matt Quinn on false charges, we felt compelled to bear witness, Sheriff, to ensure that justice is properly served. This doesn't concern you, Reverend, Taylor snarled. I believe it concerns all of us, the clergyman replied calmly. Just as the deaths of Frank Wallace, Old Jenkins, and Peterson concern us, just as the truth concerns us. Mrs. Simmons stepped forward, her stern face set in determined lines. We've lived in fear too long, Elias Taylor. Watching good people die or be driven off their land while you look the other way. It stops today. The doctor nodded in agreement. I signed those death certificates under duress with your deputy's gun at my head. God forgive me, but I won't keep silent anymore. One by one, townspeople stepped forward with their own testimonies, the banker's clerk who had been forced to falsify documents, a ranch hand who had witnessed Blackwater men setting fire to the Peterson place, the undertaker who had observed bullet wounds inconsistent with suicide on Jenkins' body. With each new voice, the sheriff's confidence visibly diminished, his deputies growing increasingly uncomfortable as they realized they were now vastly outnumbered by determined citizens. Mercy watched in amazement as the truth she and Matt had struggled to uncover poured forth in a flood of long-suppressed testimony. She scribbled frantically in her notebook, capturing every word, every accusation, every admission of coerced silence. Enough. Taylor finally shouted, drawing his gun. I'm still the law in this county, and I have a valid warrant. Not anymore, you don't, came a new voice, and a tall figure dismounted from a horse at the edge of the crowd. He was an older man with a silver star on his chest that outshone Taylor's brass badge. U.S. Marshal James Thornton. Miss Ravenwood's editor wired the territorial governor when she missed her scheduled telegrams. Governor sent me to investigate. Taylor's face drained of color. This is my jurisdiction. Federal crimes supersede local jurisdiction, the marshal interrupted. Wire fraud, extortion, conspiracy to commit murder, those fall under my authority. He approached Taylor slowly. I suggest you holster that weapon unless you want to add assaulting a federal officer to your growing list of charges. For a moment, it seemed Taylor might resist. Then, with a curse, he holstered his gun. Harrington will have all your heads for this, he growled. I think not, Marshal Thornton replied. Mr. Harrington was taken into custody in town an hour ago, along with several of his associates. Seems a clerk at the land office found his courage and delivered some very interesting documents to my deputy. He nodded toward Mercy. Your suspicions about mineral rights were correct, Miss Ravenwood. Blackwater wasn't after land for mining, they were securing water rights to the entire watershed. Water rights? Matt asked, confusion evident in his voice. The territorial governor recently signed a secret agreement with the railroad, the marshal explained. They're planning a major junction and depot in Redemption Creek, with a line running all the way to the Pacific. That information was supposedly confidential, but Harrington got wind of it somehow. Property values will increase tenfold once the railroad arrives, but only for land with reliable water access. So all this, the murders, the intimidation, the land grabs, was about water rights for a railroad that isn't even built yet? Mercy asked incredulously. Water and the fortunes it will bring, the marshal confirmed. Harrington was speculating on a massive scale, using any means necessary to secure control before prices skyrocketed. As the implications sank in, the sheriff and his deputies were disarmed and placed under arrest. The marshal organized a party to return to town with the prisoners, while the townspeople gathered around Matt and Mercy, their relief and gratitude palpable after months of living under Blackwater's shadow. Through it all, Matt remained by Mercy's side, his steady presence a comfort as she documented the extraordinary turn of events. When the crowd finally began to disperse, he led her back to the porch of his home where they sat side by side, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains. I can hardly believe it's over, Mercy said softly. 3 days ago, I stepped off a stagecoach into a mystery, and now you have quite a story to write, Matt finished for her. The Denver Chronicle will certainly be pleased. This may be the biggest story of my career. She glanced at him. But I find myself strangely reluctant to return to Denver. Matt turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. Then don't stay, he said simply. Redemption Creek could use a newspaper of its own. With the railroad coming, the town will grow. People will need someone to tell them the truth, to hold powerful interests accountable. Are you offering me a business proposition, Mr. Quinn? Mercy asked, a smile playing at her lips. Not exactly. He took her hand in his calloused palm warm against her skin. These past 3 days have been the most dangerous and most alive I've felt in years, and it's not just because of gunfire and threats and uncovering conspiracies. He paused, gathering his thoughts. It's because of you, Mercy. Your courage, your determination, your refusal to back down from what's right. Mercy's heart quickened at his words. Matt, I know it's sudden, he continued. 3 days is hardly enough time to know someone, but I feel like I've known you much longer, and the thought of you leaving. He shook his head. I'm not asking for promises, just time for us to see if what I feel, what I hope you feel too, is real. Mercy looked out at the sprawling ranch land stretching to the horizon, then back to the man beside her. 3 days ago, he had been a stranger who warned her she'd get herself talked about. Now he was someone she couldn't imagine walking away from. The town will definitely talk if I stay, she said softly. Matt's smile was slow and warm. Then let them talk about Mercy, he replied, echoing her words from their first meeting. Let them talk about how she exposed corruption and brought justice to Redemption Creek. Let them talk about how she started the town's first newspaper. And maybe, someday, let them talk about how the Quinn Ranch finally got a mistress worthy of its legacy. In answer, Mercy leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a kiss that spoke of possibilities and promises, and a future neither of them had imagined 3 days earlier. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, the setting sun bathed them in golden light, painting the beginning of their story across the Wyoming sky. 1 year later, on a clear autumn day, Mercy stood in the doorway of the Redemption Creek Chronicle office, watching as a train pulled into the newly constructed station across the street. The whistle's shrill announcement echoed through the growing town, now bustling with new businesses and settlers drawn by the railroad's arrival. Special editions ready to go, called her young assistant Tommy, holding up the freshly printed newspaper with its bold headline. Railroad brings new era to Redemption Creek. Excellent, Mercy replied, smiling at the 15-year-old boy who had proven himself an eager apprentice in the printing trade. Make sure every passenger getting off that train receives a copy. As Tommy rushed to distribute papers, Mercy felt a familiar presence behind her. Strong arms encircled her waist and she leaned back against her husband's chest. Quite a sight, isn't it? Matt said, his breath warm against her ear as they watched the first passengers disembark. My father would hardly recognize the place. Do you think he would approve of all the changes? Matt considered this. He valued progress, but he valued justice and community more. So yes, I think he would approve especially of the way the town came together to ensure the railroad benefited everyone, not just a privileged few. Mercy turned in his arms, studying the face that had become so dear to her over the past year. Marriage to Matt Quinn had brought challenges and joys in equal measure, rebuilding the fire-damaged ranch house, establishing her newspaper, navigating the expectations of a community that still sometimes raised eyebrows at a female journalist. But through it all, they had been partners in every sense, their different strengths combining to create something neither could have achieved alone. Any word from the marshal about Harrington's trial? Matt asked, nodding toward the telegram on her desk. Guilty on all counts, Mercy confirmed. 20 years in federal prison. Sheriff Taylor got 15. The others received lesser sentences depending on their involvement. Justice at last, Matt said softly, for Wallace, Jenkins, Peterson, and all the others who suffered. Mercy touched his cheek gently. Justice that wouldn't have come without your courage, Matt. You stood your ground when everyone else was selling or fleeing. We stood our ground, he corrected. Together. The sound of galloping hooves drew their attention to the street where a rider was approaching at speed. It was Dawson, now the foreman of the Quinn Ranch, his face split with a wide grin as he reined in before them. "It's happening, boss," he called excitedly. "Better get back to the ranch quick." Matt's eyes widened. "The foal now." "Star's water broke about an hour ago," Dawson confirmed, referring to the prized mare they had been carefully breeding. "Doc Richards says it's progressing well, but you'll want to be there." Matt looked torn, glancing between Mercy and Dawson. "Go," she urged, smiling at his excitement. "I'll finish up here and join you as soon as the evening edition is set." "You're sure?" His blue eyes searched hers. "Positive. This foal represents our future, Matt, the beginning of the Quinn Ranch's new bloodline. You should be there to welcome it." With a quick kiss, Matt mounted his horse and galloped off with Dawson, leaving Mercy to oversee the day's business. As she returned to her office, she placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach, a secret joy she had yet to share with her husband. Soon, very soon, she would tell him about the other new life beginning their child, who would represent an even more precious future for the Quinn legacy. The year since that fateful confrontation at the ranch had brought healing to Redemption Creek. With Blackwater's corrupt influence removed and the railroad bringing legitimate prosperity, the town had rediscovered its sense of community. The newspaper Mercy had founded served as both watchdog and cheerleader, holding power accountable while celebrating the town's achievements. And at the heart of it all was the partnership between a determined journalist and a steadfast rancher who had found in each other something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed: love built on mutual respect, shared values, and the courage to stand for truth no matter the cost. That evening, as sunset painted the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, Mercy rode home to the ranch that had become as much hers as Matt's. She found him in the barn, sitting on a hay bale beside a stall where a magnificent bay mare lay on clean straw, a spindly-legged foal nestled against her side. Matt looked up as Mercy entered, his face alight with joy. "A colt," he said softly. "Healthy and strong, come see." She joined him on the hay bale, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the newborn animal nuzzling its mother. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "What will you name him?" "I was thinking Justice," Matt replied, slipping an arm around her waist. "Seems fitting, considering everything that brought us to this moment." Mercy smiled, covering his hand with hers and gently guiding it to rest on her stomach. "I think it's perfect," she said, "and particularly meaningful given the circumstances." Matt's brow furrowed in confusion, then cleared as understanding dawned. His eyes widened, searching her face for confirmation. "Mercy, are you saying?" She nodded, her heart full as she watched hope and wonder transform his expression. "Yes. Our own new beginning will arrive sometime in early spring." With a sound that was half laugh, half sob, Matt pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, her voice steady with the certainty that had grown over their year together. "My stubborn, honorable, remarkable cowboy." As darkness fell over the Quinn Ranch, they remained in the warm barn, watching new life take its first tentative steps into the world, a perfect metaphor for their own journey from strangers thrown together by circumstance to partners bound by love and purpose. In the small Wyoming town that had once been ruled by fear, people still talked about Mercy, about her courage, her principles, her unusual path from big city journalist to small town newspaper publisher and rancher's wife. They talked about how she and Matt Quinn had exposed corruption and helped bring justice to Redemption Creek. They talked about the example they set as equal partners in all things, defying conventional expectations. And Mercy was content to let them talk, for the story they told was one of truth prevailing over deception, of community triumphing over greed, and of love flourishing in the most unexpected places, a story more powerful and enduring than any she could have written alone.